Well, alright, here we are back at the bench again, a couple hours after the last video. Got a couple stones out here, got a couple of penguins too. Gonna move the penguins out of the way. And I wanted to talk a little bit about these stamps and these Nagura in general. I know there's a lot of opinions out there about whether or not, stamps mean anything, and then there's a guy who did a litany on stamps or a treatise on stamps or something, I don't know. But we don't talk enough about the facts, okay? There are documented facts that surround the existence of these stones that, they're facts, they're not opinion. There's all kinds of opinion floating around about everything. So anyway, after I got into sharpening razors, I gravitated a little bit towards learning about polishing swords, Nihonto, Japanese swords, and I'm fascinated by all of that. And I would love to own a historical blade, but I just don't have the money or the space or anything like that, really. I would like to get a tanto, which is like a small blade, which would be the smallest of the three blades a samurai might have. Later on in history, they would have a katana, wakizashi, and then a tanto. I don't know if anybody ever carried all three, but for showing purposes, you can see those racks with the three. The tanto is small, so I would go for that. Anyway, and I had gotten in touch with a JNAT seller who recommended a couple of books to me. Hold on. Yeah, these guys here, these books, highly recommended reading. Japanese sword polishing, which is very informative, has some mentions of Nagura and what was going on, and I think one of the most important things I got out of this book was that Nagura weren't used back in like 1100 AD, maybe 1200, something like that, and it was at that point where edges were becoming more refined, and steel making was becoming more refined, and stones finer than Nagura were being sought after, sought out and used. So that I got a lot out of this book, but that was something I took home. This is mostly just about swords, and does have thing about polishing, and it's very helpful. Anyway, when people ask me how I know what I know, in part it's due to actually reading real books. Some guy on a forum once accused me of getting my information from Kung Fu movies. I don't ever recall any information about stones or swords coming out of any Kung Fu movie I ever watched. But he's a moron. Unfortunately, he sells stones, and it's a shame because, if he wasn't such a jackass, he might be a nice guy. But he isn't, so that's that. Anyway, so I had those books, and I started reading, I started learning, and then I got connected with people in Japan because I bought some Nagura from people here. My first Nagura came from a seller in the United States. They were not good. They were not stamped. I was only learning about these stamps at the time, but the stuff I had originally wasn't. It was chipping my blade, uneven polish, no good. Started sniffing around, borrowed some stone from some people, whatever, and it all had like a sort of a dubious background to it. Nothing was like objectively, factually the real deal. Okay, so that's that. I eventually got connected with someone who hoards and collects in Japan, so he helps me out, and I get some stones. I sell some stuff too, but my own stuff. Originally, I wasn't selling things initially. I didn't get in this honing thing to sell, so I wound up eventually getting my first set of Asano stamped Nagura, and you know what? They weren't that great. But then I found out that source I got those stones from, he tends to all of a sudden have like a shit ton of very rare stamped stones and a never-ending supply, and there's all this, like, I have a lot of questions about the inventory because it just, anyway, logically speaking, if something is rare, then there shouldn't be a lot of it, and there shouldn't be a never-ending supply of it. So when I see something that's rare and there's a never-ending supply of it, I start to raise my eyebrows. So I moved to another dealer, straight out of Japan, actually, and I got a set, and I was like, wow, this is like bomb diggity. Man, seriously, shit blew up my spot. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And I try other stuff. I don't only use Asano stamp Nagura, okay, but for the most part, that's what I use. In the course of my learning, I came across information about a guy, Kosuke Ozaki. He apparently was like a genius. He was a PhD in metallurgy. He was an expert on swords and polishing, and he was helping to bring back that craft and that culture and those art forms and make them stronger than they ever were. It seems that that business got trounced after World War II, and or maybe it was before World War II. I don't know exactly, but whatever, he was going to return the Japanese blade as superior in his country, and that was his thing. So, he studied all of that stuff. He's not some guy in the business. He's a legitimate, doctorate holder in metallurgy, and he was an evolutionary. He brought a lot of major changes to the world of sharp edge tools. He believed in, strongly believed in education and hands-on experience, and he was a great guy, and he did a lot for the business, Famously, he got into making blades, razors, in the 40s. And, he learned from other makers, and I believe maybe he was making and Tanafuji was finishing. And, it's a small island. It's a big country, but, relatively speaking, it's a small world. A lot of people were involved with the beginning of Iwasaki razors. And so it wasn't just him. So, and he was taking on, my point is, he was taking on all this information from these established blacksmiths, and, he was teaching them stuff, and they were teaching him things, and he was also like groundbreaking in reviving the world of tamagahane and learning about that steel, and that's the gem steel that was used to make katana back in the day, and there's a very special process to make it, and, it's really quite special. It's a very interesting steel. So it's an old craft and it's an old form, but it's still relevant. That's my point. It's not something that's just like, oh, well, that's old school. We do something else different today. I mean, there's new things too, but old stuff doesn't just go away because, someone decided new is better. All right. So one of the things he wanted to do was make sure that all of his work, came to maximum fruition. So he wanted to make sure, oh, by the way, this is a Tokyo grid. It has some stripes. It's pretty square, but it's not extremely square. It's a very nice shaped stone, but the grading system here, the Tokyo, has to do with color and shape, not the quality of the stone. Just want to throw that in there. Anyway, Iwasaki wanted to make sure that his efforts in reviving the industry came to complete fruition, so he wanted to make sure that everyone had the best sharpening tools and materials available to them. If you think about it, it makes perfect sense. It's actually brilliant, because if you make a great blade and you can't sharpen it to a great edge, then what was the point in the first place? Like any scientist, he was a scientist, by the way, and he relied heavily on a metallurgy microscope to take a look at what was going on with the steel and everything. He was very into high magnification inspection. Anyway, he studied the stones found in around Kyoto, particularly eastern mines, and Nagura from Mikawa area in Japan, obviously. And he came to the determination that stones from Nakayama were like highly excellent, and those that had a Maruka stamp were I believe he referred to them as being gems or something to that effect. He gave them high praise. Now, he also said that stones from Ozaki were a close second and less expensive, and they were nice for beginners. And I find it interesting because you don't really see too many stones from Ozaki, even though like one of the world's most renowned metallurgists and what have you gave them props. He went off looking for Nagura, and he knew about the Nagura because that's what sword polishers used to bring up the edge on the sword. So he was borrowing from their world. He was bringing it into the world of straight razors in general. Anyway, he wound up going to a location in Aichi Prefecture, and this place was known by sword polishers to have produced great stuff. And he secured some samples from there, and he agreed with that assessment after testing stones from all over. He didn't just like confirmation bias his ass along the way, like what goes on today in forums. He, tested stones. He looked into stuff, and he found that yes, these polishers said those stones were great, and then I'm going to go and find where those stones came from. So he went to that location. The location was closed, but he convinced them to open or reopen. The person he was working with was Naguyuki Asano, right? Yes, Asano stamps, right? Okay, so at this point, we're getting into the meat of things. Now, this is post, obviously, 46, 47, and but I'm not exactly sure when. I'm going to say probably just before 1963. And the quarry in question, where Asano was connected to, in the village of Miwa, in the district of Kidashitara, and that's like in the northeastern part of Mikawa province in Aichi prefecture. Anyway, Iwasaki worked with Mr. Asano to develop a grading system, and part of that is the color and shape grades that theoretically don't have anything to do with actual performance, although in a way they do, because a harder Nagura is going to be different than a softer one, and so on and so forth. Some stones are harder than others, and sometimes the color and shape might lend a hand in determining what's what, but the proof is always in the pudding. You got to use it to know. You can't just say a solid white Botan is XYZ. You have to always test them. Anyway, Iwasaki and Asano, they went through the quarry, and they tested and named the 10 layers of Nagura there. Today there's like, it's thought that there are 12, but they're not all used, and maybe the layers didn't get counted back then because they weren't viable for producing stone. He didn't want to get into any confusion. But anyway, after they had the stones labeled, and they had the names, like this is Koma, right? Koma, Nagura, and you have Botan Nagura, Tenjin Nagura, and you have Ye Botan, and then there's all sorts of stuff. There's like layers we don't use, you don't see anymore, Ban and Atsu, so on and so forth. Once they had that all done, they came up with the stamps, and then the stones were stamped, and shortly after that, Iwasaki, there's a booklet printed. I don't know if they actually made a booklet or that he did a speech and a booklet was printed from it. I'm a little unsure of that, but at some point that booklet was translated by a gentleman named Jim Rion, and you can find it online. Honing Razors and Nihon Kamasori, I think is the title, but if you just look around, eventually you'll find it. In there, he actually references the importance of using the stones from Kidashitara. I mean, he references the mine, like right there. And he also mentions that, to make sure you're using the ones that are examined, graded, and stamped by Asano. I mean, that's a huge recommendation. That's a major piece of information and direction from a very qualified individual. The only Nagura that have these stamps, by the way, are the Nagura that come from that location. Okay, there are Nagura quarried other places. They might have no stamps, or they might have different stamps. Okay, those are not the same stone as this because they don't come from the same quarry. All right, remember, Iwasaki went to the one place where these stones came from and worked with those people to produce these stamps to go on those stones. All right. So, if you think about it, in his career and the depth of his career, and how demanding he was when it came to all of this stuff, you realize just how meaningful that declaration and that direction is. A lot of people will take it lightly. A lot of people would just be like, it doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want. I can hone. I can strop. I can do whatever I want. I'm just shaving. But once you get into it, you start realizing like the importance of the education, the understanding, and the history of everything that happened leading up to like basically now. We have to keep a few things in mind. How like you shop around for stones and you can find everything is Hanyama. Okay, and there's a joke in Japan. It says Hanyama, available in 68 locations. Hanyama is technically only Shobodani and Nagayama. But the retail world diluted it because everybody wanted those stones, and then there were these other stones. So, people come up, they're like, oh, it's the same thing. It's a green stone like that green stone. You should buy it. It's a Hanyama, but it's not the case. So you have those people, and they're doing that. Similarly, you have the same people trying to pass off non-Asano Nagura as the same thing because it's white, right? Or striped or whatever, and it comes from that part of Japan, allegedly. You don't know where it came from because there's no road map on the stone. There really is no way to know. And we want to believe people when they speak, but maybe they just don't know. Maybe the wholesaler told them that, and they have no real reason to doubt the wholesaler, except maybe the wholesaler just wants to sell stones. It's not like we never see fake stamped stones. We just had a big debacle with a guy who was selling fake Hatahoshis. So we know that deception goes on. Okay. Which is why, you come here, unless somebody forged the stamp, at least you know that that's what this is. If you know the person who's getting these for you, and they're working with the mine, or maybe like with one person in between the mine and them, you're getting the right thing. And that might be important to you. I know it's important as hell to me because I hate junk stone and scratching my head like, why isn't this working? Oh, because it's a piece of chalk and not really a Nagura. So anyway, the only stones with these stamps come from that location in Miwa, all right? Everything else is whatever else it is. And, other stuff can be good, you just don't know. But don't call it Mikawa Nagura, or flippantly, just because you think it came from Nagura. How do you know it came from Mikawa, right? I have, see this piece of Koma? This came to me from a polisher, a very high-end Togishi. He gets paid a lot of money to hone historical blades, and he does it all year long. That's his life. And this was a stone he had that broke, and he had glued it back together and used it for a while, but then he sold it to me, and I separated the broken pieces and then cut out usable pieces. This is the last one, okay? Out of that box, you see the little K. That was for me to let me know it's Koma. This is completely different than this Koma and everything else. I have no idea where this came from. I was assured it was Koma. It was a good stone. There were inclusions in it, but I cut around them. So he called it Koma, but he did not say it was a Asano stamp. Good stone. This is better. Okay? Nice piece. Great piece. All right? I have another piece. I got this, right? This was bought from a well-known seller. This is not so great. Sold as Koma. It is not as good as this. It does not have the refinement qualities that one would expect from Koma. I had a similar looking piece that was pretty good from him, in his behalf, and he's just selling me stone that he believes to be what it is, and that's fine. But this is like sort of middle of the road stuff. So that's laying in my collection. So anyway, if you don't know where something came from, you don't know what it is. It may be good, it may not be good. And what you do with it, we have to be responsible. I could not take this out and sell this as Mikawa Nagura because I don't know if it came from Mikawa. For all I know, it came from Nagata. To be honest, this hones like chew. Okay? The layers that make up these stones, they run through the country there. It's not like a perfect layer cake where everything is moving along, perfectly even and whatever. There are locations where Nagura are dug out of the ground where there's only one big fat layer. The original location, the layers are clearly defined. That doesn't really occur anywhere else, all right? So anyway, we have to be careful about what we're buying, and when people want to sell us like, oh, this is Mikawa Nagura. Well, I relate it to the stories of Cuban cigars, where like if you walk through the streets of Havana, like people will come up to you and they'll say, Psst, cigar, and they want you to buy the cigar because they have a cousin who works in the factory. They always have a cousin, always in the factory. They want to sell you a box of Cohiba Esplendidos for, I don't know what the running rate is now. In the old days, it was like $20 for a box that was selling for $300 in the government store. I can tell you, I've bought both, okay? And the stuff from the street is never even close to the stuff out of the store, all right? So yeah, it's a Cuban cigar, and yeah, it has the same box, and yeah, it has the same markings and wrappers and everything else, but it is not a Cohiba Esplendido. So anybody who wants to believe that can believe that, but I've been there and I've done that. I've actually spent a lot of time in Cuba, but that's another story. Anyway, so that's how I equate this Nagura thing. It's just like, psst, Nagura. Anyway, so, on top of the stuff from Iwasaki, right? Another scientist tested Coma Nagura, Nagura in general, but the test that people know about is the one with Coma. He came up with the particle sizes initially, starting out at 10 to 20 micron, which, as you know, is pretty heavy. But what was his name? Tahara, something like that. And yeah, he tested. Guess what? Asano stamp stones. Why? Because he knows what it is. Okay, he knows that this is like the benchmark, and that's that. What do you call it? The quarry itself. I want to show you something out of a book, another book by Ozaki. Well, besides the booklet, which is online, there's a famous book, How to View Cutlery. Is my copy. I have this one-page bookmarked here. If you look here, is that it? Yeah, that's it. My eyes are not that great. But if you look right there, okay, that is a drawing of the excavation at the site where the Nagura are mined. And the numbering of the layers going from 1 to 10, This is probably one of the most famous books on metallurgy and blades. Basically, you see me refresh the slurry a couple of times with this blade, and I tell you why. I want to run it a little harder than I have been. I don't normally these days really I'm using more pressure right now than I normally would when I hone. You can't tell, but so just believe me, just a little bit, because I want to sort of push down to the stone. I want to really get a little extra cut going on, and this is only going to be for the very beginning, and then I'm going to slow down on that. Anyway, so when you're buying Nagura, you got to be careful about what you're buying. If somebody tells you it's like Mikawa Nagura, if it doesn't have stamps, neither you or he could possibly know where it came from. It could be anything, and that's not to say it's going to be a bad stone. It's just that it's definitely not from the original source, because if it was, it would have the stamp. And then you have all these questions. If it's a really good deal, like you're getting 150 grams of that stone for I don't know, $15, yeah, that's cool. If somebody says to you it's pre-Asano stamps, but the ink is obviously, from last week, yeah, I don't know that I would continue to deal with that guy. Factually, Nagura wasn't stamped before Asano started doing it. He was the first. They were the first people to start doing that. There wasn't so much marketing being done back in the early days, so we just have to be careful out there. A lot of sellers. There's a lot of talk about honesty. Honesty only has a little bit of a play in it. Like the guy in Russia, he's downright like a scumbag. He's ripping people off left and right. Okay, that's dishonest. But you have people who just don't know, and they're repeating information given to them by people they might trust. So it's not so much about whether or not somebody is honest. Not really. No, it isn't. Okay, because the bottom line is facts. Okay, what are your facts? You either have these stamps or you don't. The stone is either from the original location or it isn't. Okay, if it is, then you're good. If it isn't, then you have to test it. Okay, and if you like it, you like it, and if you don't, you don't. All right, what you pay for this should not be nearly the same weight price per gram as that, but I routinely see this stuff running for big numbers. Oh, bigger numbers than they should be. That's just one of those things. Anyway, just wanted to I guess, do a vlog on the Asano stamp. So I guess I've done that. Anyway, the feeling on this, all right, is a very interesting stone to work with. It is one of my favorite coma, you know. I was going to actually do some honing on the other two, the unknowns. That was like part of the plan because they're out. But you know what? I'm not gonna, because this edge is kind of like where I need it to be, so I'm good to go on that. Oh, before we go, I wanted to show off another piece of coma. I have this, you know, and it's got this nice label on the box and all these nice stamps and stuff. And you open it up, and it's got this big block of stone in here, and I don't know, it says 22 or something, and then there's, I don't know, like fake straw or some shit down there. And a very interesting look on the stone. I have never seen an Asano stamp Nagura with those stripes on it. Never. Not any kind. Especially not coma. I've seen stripes. I'm just saying, not with this like sort of wavy, sort of patterny thing. That's pretty unique. Anyway, this has stamps, but these are not Asano stamps. All right. This is a very good stone. Okay. So I'm just saying, just because something isn't Asano doesn't mean it's not a good stone. You can get a great stone that's not Asano. I've looked at my edges and my bevels after using this on my microscope. Very identical to what I'm getting off of my Asano stamp stuff. And trust me, I have a bunch of this and I test them all the time, and I do my comparisons of non-Asanos to Asanos. And if this measures up, then it measures up, you know, and that's all that really matters. Anyway, but I hope I help some people out and understanding a little bit more about these stamps and the origin. I'll probably do another video on these stamps at some point in the future. But anyway, I'm going to do one more run on this, and then I'm going to move to Tomo Nagura. All right. And then I'm going to be done. So anyway, at this point, I'm going to wrap things up for you, and then I'm going to get to finishing this. And so in the meantime, you know, I'm going to put a couple of penguins out here to say goodbye. And anyway, so like anything with honing, be careful. Pay attention to who you're dealing with. Don't accept wooden nickels. What that means is, if it's stamped correctly, then it's correct. If it isn't, you don't know what the hell it is. And just because somebody says it's the same as this, that don't mean shit. All right? So, have a nice day. Take care. Get out there, do some honing, have some fun. And remember, it's just shaving, folks. Take care. Talk to you soon.